Hello everybody, this is Dennis Stanley with Lindsay Jones University, and this is part 3 of the video segment series that we talk about the meeting that happened with the NBRC, where they talked, I think more than in any other meeting, about what's going to happen to the 2027 respiratory therapy examination. The purpose of this, of course, is to help you to prepare for that as your students get ready. We know that you have some nervousness about that. Be sure not only to watch this video, but there are several parts that have occurred before this. And of course, we'll be making more videos as we talk about that and learn more about that examination. But this series is really focusing on what happened in that meeting and what we're supposed to think about that. Some of the things that we'd like to cover today is how, as an instructor, to get a good feel of what the new examination is going to be like before 2027. The NBRC did talk about a couple of things that you can do, and there were some interesting questions in that regard. We'll also talk about what the NBRC is going to do and change in terms of keeping the content up to date. That's very interesting because it's very different than what they have done in the past. And then finally, they had some very interesting and very important things to say about being careful about using the secure assessment examination. So stay tuned, let's cover it. We'll talk about that now. All right, our first subject is how to get a good feel for that exam. We know that you as instructors, above all, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face. We can refer to the detailed content outline. You can listen to every lecture that the NBRC does, but still really understanding what it's going to feel like to get on the exam and participate in what's called a clinical judgment question compared to the breadth of knowledge questions. What's that going to look like? What's it going to feel like? Well, talking about it just doesn't get you there. And so when I asked about that, at the meeting, there were several instructors that wanted to know, how do we get this information? Dr. Shaw did mention that a free full-length examination is going to come out in July of 2026. And the inference there is that you could take that exam and at least get a feel of what those questions could be like. Now, this was a little bit controversial, but one of the instructors did ask, what about using the secured assessment exam or the payable self-assessment exam to also get a feel? And of course, naturally, the kind of pregnant pause that occurred in the room was that naturally you could do that, but then Dr. Shaw was very keen to point out that that's not what its intended use is for. But of course, naturally, if you used one of those exams, you would get a little bit more of a feel for what's on that exam. I think the hesitation there, of course, always is that they're trying to protect the information, and they certainly wouldn't want you even disclosing the things that you saw on those examinations, so they're probably trying to just get you to be cautious. But I just can't imagine anything wrong with that, taking that exam yourself and still just getting a better feel of what a clinical judgment question is like. It's not that you're going to copy those exam questions, but if you're writing exams yourself, you certainly want to be able to write all questions that have the equal amount of complexity, the cognitive level, the feeling of an exam. That's what we do at Lindsay Jones University. We try to write questions that feel like that. We don't write the exact questions that we see, of course. We wouldn't want to do that anyway. We don't care if the student is trying to memorize. That's not going to help. We want them to understand. So that's one thing that you can do to get a feel for that examination. All right, this next area I think is very, very interesting and somewhat good news. Kinda, maybe not as much good news as the NBRC might think that it is, but they did mention that they have already been writing questions for the 2027 exam, and they've already been validating them, get this, on the TMC examination even right now. So that is good news. That means that students have already been experiencing that, and the inference is if they didn't notice the difference between what they saw in the exam and what they've been experiencing in your program, then they're probably not really crazy different questions that they're about to be exposed to. Now, one thing that Dr. Shaw said, and I thought this was okay, I'm not sure it's proof that it's okay, but he said that they've had those questions out there and they've received 0 calls. And I do think that's good news that no one has complained about that. However, I would also just suggest that if they're a student, I'm not sure they would know to give you a call. So they're going in there, they're very nervous, they don't know, they've never seen that exam, nobody's ever telling them what's on the exam because they're not supposed to, and they're going to see those questions, and would they know after an exam to come out and say, hey, I better call call the NBRC because they had a question on there that I didn't know what they were talking about or that looked really different than what I've ever seen before. Well, first of all, they've never seen those questions because they've never seen the actual exam before. So I'm not sure that that's super duper good proof, but I will admit that if they've already been testing them and students have been getting through those and passing those, the inference is that maybe those questions aren't so bad after all. Now, let me talk about the content and how the NBRC is going to handle that. By Dr. Shaw's own admission, they talk about the idea that they've always had an internal committee to update the content on the exam, and they would update the content and then they would leave it that way for about 5 years, let's say. But now they're changing their model and they're using a very special committee that's not internal to the NBRC exam, but it is comprised of you directors out there. And I don't know how big the committee is. He mentioned something like that. I don't remember what he said about that. But he did say the committee was comprised proportionally of different types of programs because more than half of the programs are associate programs, and they use directors from those types of programs. And then, of course, they mix in those that are in bachelor's and master's programs as well. And ideally, what's supposed to happen is that exam is going to be updated or looked at content every 2 years. I think that's pretty good news because one of the problems with the exam for most of us was that there were things on that exam that we thought, well, we kind of roll our eyes and think that's not really done in real life. How did we get to that point that it made it to the exam? So hopefully the new committee that are comprised of you directors can raise your hand and say, wait a minute, I don't really think this is something that we do in real life, and so that's a little bit detached from real life. Maybe we shouldn't have that in the exam. I hope that's the outcome for that. I know, just kind of speaking loosely here, that you all have maybe experienced this, is that I have participated or experienced an exam question before. I remember this one where I experienced a question that talked about a piece of equipment that I had never heard of before in my life. And of course, I do this all the time. So if I've never heard of it, I know other people are going to think, what the heck is that? Well, I didn't know what it was. So after the question I experienced, I went home and I looked up that piece of equipment only to find out that equipment was something that had been used more than 25 or 30 years ago. So the question is, how does that get to be an exam question? Hopefully you instructors will see stuff like that and say, wait a minute, that piece of equipment hasn't been used in 30 years, and then it will never make it to the examination. So we hope that the content, the way they do that, refreshing every 2 years, and your involvement will make a difference in the legitimacy of what's on the exam and the accuracy and the appropriateness to what's actually occurring in real life. Now, finally here, I want to just share one more thing that was very, very interesting that happened in that meeting, and it has to do with being careful how you use the Secure Assessment Exam, the SAE, for your students. This was important, and it's important to us as Lindsey Jones University, and I'll tell you why. But it has to do with the fact that sometimes programs like to use the SAE, the NBRC's SAE, as a tool to decide if somebody passes a course or, heaven forbid, passes the RTE program. Now, both COARC and the NBRC are going to give you somewhat of a caution statement on here. You certainly can do that. They're not going to stop you from doing that. But listen to what the COARC says. Now, this is in the COARC criteria. I want to read it to you exactly. It says, when a program uses an examination with a particular score to override prior academic performance, the program has created a consequential examination result. Under these circumstances, the program must justify such use of both the examination and the cut score. What that means is that, as you know, the NBRC, first of all, does not produce a cut score for the secured assessment examination. They don't actually give you a result that says you passed or you didn't pass. The idea is that you as an instructor can look at that and remediate with your group or individuals certain topic areas so that you know how to bring them up, or maybe even change your program, your syllabus, whatever that means to you. But if you're using that to decide if a student is going to pass a course or pass the program, then that's going to be considered what's called a consequential examination result. And if you do that, then you're going to have to justify, one, the fact that you used the examination, and two, where'd you come up with the cut score to decide that? I would imagine that would be hard to justify. Maybe you can do it. Maybe you've got a great reason to do it. And they're not saying you can't do it, but they are saying, of course, if you don't use those, then you don't have to justify anything because you're not using them in that way. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't use that score as a smaller part of a decision to decide if they pass a course in RT program, but if you're using it consequentially to decide if they pass, you're using that to what I call gatekeep, decide if they can get past that point or not, then you are using it in that way. So the NBRC is suggesting they're not going to tell you that you can't, and the COARC's not going to tell you that you can't, but they're really kind of, if you read between the lines, trying to tell you, be careful with that. They're really, in my opinion, trying to tell you not to do that. Now, the reason why that's interesting to us at Lindsey Jones University is because the same thing happens with Lindsey Jones University. We caution instructors never to use a test on Lindsey Jones University to make a consequential decision about whether somebody can pass a course or not. In fact, we always encourage you, if you're going to use Lindsey Jones University, and give a score for participation, but please don't take one of the examinations and say, well, they made a 60 on a Lindsey Jones exam, so that's the grade I'm going to put in the book, and that's going to cause them to fail the course. Or if they don't pass this, we hate this idea that they're not going to pass at all the program or that particular course. The one reason why we care about that also is that generally, when students look at something like Lindsey Jones University, we want them to look at Lindsey Jones University and the practice questions and the courses there as a partner to them to help them pass the examination. But if you use that same tool to help you decide to gatekeep, in other words, decide if they can go beyond this point, if they pass this course or not, then what happens is in the minds of the student, they change their perception of what Lindsey Jones University is. And now it becomes an enemy. Occasionally I'll have instructors call and say, hey, I tested all my students and they were doing it for a grade, only to find out that the students had found some of the answers on the internet. And we tell them, yeah, that's because Lindsey Jones University is not a secure examination. It's really meant there to help students practice. Well, if you tell students that if you don't pass this exam, then you're going to fail the course, well, guess what? Some of those students are going to do whatever they need to, including try to find the answers or get the answers in advance, because what they're trying to do is just get past the course. We would rather, and we find it more effective when students think of Lindsey Jones University and other similar tools as a partner because they want to pass the actual examination, get their license, and get on with their life. And so we want to be their friend and their partner, not their enemy and their obstacle. So for the same reason, we also say be careful about using even Lindsey Jones University as a barometer to decide, or a gatekeeping method to decide if somebody passes the test or not. So those are some interesting things. We'll continue with these video segments to talk about what happened in that meeting, what difference it makes to you, and what Lindsey Jones is doing to help prepare your students for that. If you're not using Lindsey Jones and you want to know more, you might find it very, very interesting. Simply call our office. We'll be happy to give you an online tour. We're also even happy to give you an evaluation. Turn on Lindsey Jones and let your students use it for a small spell so they can tell you what they think of it. All right, I'm Dennis Stanley. We'll look forward to meeting you in the next video.